regulation. So most of us just call it the task node on governance. As always, you should be able to get up-to-date information on what we are up to by going to our website, which is governance.task.ac.uk. For those of you who haven't been to these websites, the whole task program is following the formula that task.ac.uk is for the program. Each node, in our case governance, is prepended to that. Each of these web pages will give you up-to-date information on what we are up to in terms of events, research activities, collaborations, and so on. We also have a Twitter feed that you should subscribe to so that you're kept up to date. Now, as I said in my emails while I was setting this up, it seems like we had our previous meeting just recently. Certainly in my memory, it seems like it's just been a couple of months. But it is 1 year almost exactly to the date since the time we were awarded this project and the project started officially. Of course, the start was in the middle of COVID lockdowns and so on, so it was a slow start. But I'm delighted to say that we have properly now gotten started. We have all of our team in place, as I'll say a bit more. And so it is timely for us to have this meeting to engage with our broader network. And in the spirit of participatory design, we want to get ideas from our network to make sure that we are asking the right sorts of questions, that we are steering the project in ways that would be useful to everybody. So with that, let me get started. So the agenda for the day is as follows. You would have seen this from the emails and from the invitations that you received. So I will take about 20 or so minutes to give you some introductory remarks, mostly to set the scene of what we are doing as a node. It is not my intention to steal the thunder from my colleagues who will come later, who will go into a lot more detail on some of these issues. What I want to do is to try to show you the broader landscape of how these things are coming together, how we think we are trying to address the broader issues that motivated the program and this node in particular. And so up to lunch break, we'll mostly have presentations from people inside the project describing what we are up to in terms of our methodology, the ways in which we're asking questions, preliminary results that we are beginning to get, and so on. After lunch in the afternoon, we'll have 2 discussion sessions. The first one would be on the proposed EU AI Act and other such regulations. And in particular, we'll hear from legal experts and people who've thought about this kind of thing for a long time about what does it look like if you just read it naively. It's a long 100-page document, which maybe is not quite bedtime reading, but if you do read it, and if you're not familiar with the legal process, then you come away with certain takeaways. Whereas if you understand how the process works, maybe you kind of read between the lines and think about it differently, which is what I hope our legal colleagues can shed some light on. So please join that session. And then the final session of the day would be a discussion on something that's been quite an important topic within the node, which is the use of simulations. What are the opportunities from using simulations in this framework, which is clearly an important piece of the puzzle. Every big AI player will be using simulations in one form or the other. At the same time, there are limitations, and our field work and various discussions have exposed what the limits are of this kind of methodology. So we want to have a discussion about both of these, and in particular, how that can be used in the toolchain for governance and regulation as we envision. Suzanne will be recording all of these. You would have seen a message pop up, and we will be sharing it broadly afterwards. So let me begin my remarks with the recap. So what are we doing within this node? For those of you who've attended my previous talks, you would know that we are setting out to develop frameworks, investigate and develop frameworks for formal and informal governance. By formal, we mean regulatory instruments and the kinds of things that the developer of an autonomous, in particular AI-based autonomous system must do. And informal refers to all the other things that go around the formal regulatory burdens. So much of the system development is based on how you collect data, whom you speak to, whom you don't speak to, how exactly records are kept inside an organization, and what that ultimately means for risks and obligations. And so we want to take a look at both of these. And through that, we want to come up with frameworks for accountability and responsibility. So a lot of these terms are talked about throughout the media, throughout the AI and social and legal circles. And in each setting, I think people mean different things by it. So it's important that we have a discussion such that we can synthesize what is it that we want in ways that can be understood by different communities. And then we want to come up with computational tools to help the ecosystem of developers and regulators. So both during the development process and to some extent what happens post-market at deployment time. So this is a 3.5-year project, and we are 1 year into this project period. And our design was to split the project into 2 phases. I have put a tilde to indicate that our original intention of making it a 2-year and a 1.5-year, clean split of the phases has now turned into a somewhat more fuzzy transition between phase 1 and phase 2. Mostly to do with the ways in which people were appointed and delays in getting the project started. But it has also turned into an opportunity for us to be more creative about how we use our resource. But broadly speaking, what this means is that for the past year and for the coming year, we've been looking very much at developing frameworks and thinking within the node about what do we mean by the terms, what kind of tools we want to use, what initial prototypes we can put together, with a view to then scaling it up in the second half of the project in larger case studies, as we've discussed a few times already. So for me, the most gratifying development so far in the past year is that our team is fully on board. Importantly, the research program that we had originally envisioned is very much underway. So in each pillar and in each work package, people are actively engaging in, what are the technical questions, what are the tools we can develop, and so on. There are a few pictures missing here, and this just shows that our web page and many of our kind of external facing devices are still work in progress, but the research is kind of very much ongoing. All of this is happening in an interesting landscape. So this is perhaps the best time to have started a project like this, and the task program as a whole is extremely timely. So what you see here is a snapshot taken from the UK government's national AI strategy. So they have helpfully broken down and displayed their strategy in summary form on their webpage. If you go there, in terms of 3 months from the time that the strategy was announced a couple of months ago. And I think it was 1 year and then the longer term. And so already, if you look at what is meant to be the strategy as of today, as I speak, there's a lot of emphasis on finding ways in which one can look at the use of AI in a number of different sectors. So health and social care is salient given the times we are living in and the investment in NHS AI Lab. The column under governing AI is directly relevant to the activities of our node. So there's a lot of activity ongoing at the moment. For instance, CDEI's assurance roadmap, consultations around data and governance of data. And literally in the past 5-6 weeks, every week I must have attended one of these kinds of briefings somewhere or the other, talking about what are the different ways in which we want to talk about assurance, safety, trustworthiness, governance. So there's a lot of active interest in multiple bodies across the government, across third sector, and different users, both in the private sector and in kind of domains such as defense. Somewhat more broadly speaking, if you look further into the strategy, there's a lot of emphasis on a number of things that impact the work of our node. For instance, there's a proposal to pilot an AI standards hub. And we hope if something like this is going to happen, then we would be able to engage in some way and be able to participate in the process by which people come up with AI technical standards. There's a lot of focus on, AI safety, broadly defined, what it means. How do we want to define it? How do we want to structure, everything in the AI development pipeline such that we can govern and regulate it? There are also concrete proposals about, what does the Office of AI do, and what do kind of specific institutions do in terms of adoption, and then in the process of adoption, what regulatory requirements you want to place there. So for all of these reasons, it's extremely timely. And I'm speaking from the University of Edinburgh, which is in Scotland. And Scotland announced its own AI strategy a couple of months before the UK national one. And there's a lot of alignment between the two. So one of the big program initiatives in the Scottish AI strategy is to develop ethical and regulatory frameworks for AI. And there's a lot of emphasis on thinking about skills, development of the whole sector, and ways in which we think about data. So this is the kind of government landscape in which we are operating. There's also kind of just, the broader landscape of how people have been coping with the COVID times and so on. So here's a particularly interesting statistic to me, which talks about the ways in which people's attitudes to the adoption of digital technologies has literally changed overnight in a matter of months. So the plots that you see on the left-hand side are from a survey. Now, these are kind of small cohort surveys done by consulting companies. So you have to take the data with a certain amount of caution. But what the data speaks to is probably a trend that all of us have observed, which is that there's a lot more receptivity to the use of digital technologies and just mechanisms and methodologies that just a year or two before were looked at as somewhat futuristic. So for me, the most striking change is in the physicians' views about the use of telephone, remote, and video consultation. So they've gone from roughly around 20% of physicians before COVID saying they would consider it to 80% during COVID times. And a lot of this has persisted. So it has kind of plateaued at 50+% of physicians being open to considering these kinds of things. Now, this plot is just talking about video consultation, which is not a whole lot about AI and autonomy. But the shift is towards then the whole health system thinking in terms of smart hospitals, hospitals at home, virtual presence. And the interesting point there is 73% of physicians saying they are going to consider virtual reality as a means by which they do diagnosis, which then indirectly brings us the question of then to what extent will it be autonomous? To what extent will there be autonomous elements in the pipeline? What does that mean for acceptability, trust, and various such things? So that's the landscape in which we are operating. And to give you kind of two specific snippets in all of this, I find it quite amusing. So this is literally the left-hand side article is literally from the news a couple of days ago. In the US, they've had a big development in the form of an infrastructure bill that's making its way through the legislative system. And one element of it, which is well-intentioned, is to try to put in money for beacons for cyclists and then pedestrian monitoring and so on, which raises a whole variety of questions. On the one hand, there are questions such as if you put the burden of being detected on the pedestrian who never signed up or went through a licensing regime or anything like that, then is the burden in the right part of the society? And that's, of course, a big debate to be had. There are also technical questions arising from this, which is, how would you make this system reliable enough that this makes sense for the intended purpose, which is to facilitate better collision avoidance and minimize accidents. So what does it mean to make the system technically trustworthy? And then the broader question, what does it mean for even a simple, seemingly simple technical system like this to be socially acceptable? Then a different example is taken from AI-based medical diagnostics, where there was a careful study that was done about the extent to which AI systems are actually human competitive when compared not just in one-off kind of computer vision experiments, but when compared in the same ways that you would evaluate a human team in terms of a paired evaluation by two radiologists reading the screen and coming up with a consensus opinion and so on. And it turns out that we are still not there yet in terms of the accuracy of the system being human competitive. So there are important and crucial distinctions between notions of error, notions of accuracy, notions of trustworthiness, between kind of one-off studies done at the level of an AI system and the same study done at the level of the full system. So we find these kinds of anecdotes interesting because they give rise to the questions that we are really studying in the node. And although these are just anecdotes, what I want to say is that we're coming up with a multidisciplinary approach that's allowing us to think about this sort of question from a number of different perspectives. So the way our work so far has been shaping up, and I think it gives us a template for how we think we'll do bigger case studies in the future as well, is that our questions have been derived from regulatory proposals on needs of what needs to be done in terms of governance and regulation. And we've been addressing them through a variety of methods, which include, for instance, fieldwork and ethnography, and also a solid understanding of what's possible in terms of computational and AI methods. And we've been looking at them as an integrated whole, which then gives us enough of an understanding for us to say, then how do we go from there to new frameworks that we're interested in? So in the next few minutes, I want to give you kind of a glimpse into how this story is shaping up. The details will again be revisited by my colleagues, but what I want to give you is how the narrative is shaping up across disciplines and how we are weaving them together. So for instance, the first story is about error characterization. And so if you've read the EU AI Act, you might have seen that there's quite a bit of emphasis on risk and quality management systems and obligations about accuracy, robustness, and also the requirement that if learning or AI-based systems were to be utilized, there should be no performance deterioration, and this should be kind of established by ex-ante conformity assessment. So this gives us the starting point for a certain kind of question, and we could say, what could we do about it? Some of these issues are already being looked at in the AI community in the form of robustness analysis and uncertainty quantification and testing methods. But not always from the point of view of what would be needed in order to look at it in the holistic way that I've been trying to motivate. So in our current and ongoing work, we are looking at a number of new methods, which range from a model cards-like methodology for thinking about neural network robustness, coming up with predictive uncertainty models that are causal and factorized so that we can think about these reporting obligations in very structured forms, new ways of doing automated testing in the form of adaptive experiment design and adversarial testing, which in our field work is turning out to be one of the important factors that people say isn't being looked at enough. And an important driver of all of this work is exactly the discussion that's going on with ethnographic studies in one instance, thinking about the security of calves, another instance in speaking to a team that's engaged in AI-based diagnosis. And what this flags up for us are the needs of what we think is needed, and also where are the gaps, such as margins of error is not just about the technical error, but it's also about how error is introduced in the social and socio-technical system. And so when we then finally develop a task node framework for error characterization, we're going to be looking at all of this. And that's how we see the activities that we are engaged in bear fruit. So similarly, to give you another cross-disciplinary story that's been emerging already in our current work, we are looking at the requirements of transparency, which is a key ingredient of just about every AI regulatory instrument that's being proposed, including post-market monitoring about when something goes wrong, what can you say? Now, this is, of course, situated in the landscape of a burgeoning community of people looking at XAI, but we are bringing new ideas by thinking about what does it mean to have causal explanations, and also having our colleagues look at qualitative mapping of responsibilities beyond the technical system itself to inform what the XAI must address. And this brings us new questions, such as, what's the difference between a forward and a backward view of responsibility? So as opposed to just finding somebody to blame in the past, what we are really asking, and what I think normal people really want, is to look forward and say, can I trust the system in future? Should I get in the car? Not, what did it do badly in the past? And there are also kind of important questions, as I said before, that are coming up about how errors really arise in the broader socio-technical system. And so here again, we are coming up with a new way of thinking about transparency and responsibility and merging all of these computational, social, and legal ideas together. So all of this is happening in a highly collaborative environment. So we are engaged with in fieldwork interviews with a number of companies. We are beginning to engage with teams within regulatory bodies such as MHRA. We are having discussions with interesting teams such as NATS and the Turing Institute, who are engaged in looking at the air traffic management data and what we can say about trustworthiness there. Within the task program, some of us are involved in pump priming projects, which is allowing us to expand our scope. There's the plan for international visits in the new year when travel becomes a little bit more normalized. We are organizing international workshops. And I'm pleased to say that one of our co-investigators is going to be the lead of a new node on task node on responsibility. So together with all of this, we hope that our network is giving us the kind of breadth we need to ask the kinds of questions that have been motivating. So I want to end by saying that we are keen to cultivate and develop this network. And as part of it, we've come up with a document that's a sort of easy introduction to the node. What are we doing? Who's involved? What are the different activity streams? And I would request you to circulate it widely within your networks, spread the word about what we are doing, help people connect with us. And concretely, Suzanne will share a PDF copy of this document along with video recordings of this after the day's meetings are finished. And so, once again, welcome to this annual meeting. I hope you will participate actively in all of the discussions, and I look forward to them. Thank you.